Welcome to Chapter 6. Today's chapter is going to dive into recruiting high quality talent. By the time you're done with this video and with really reading Chapter 6 in its entirety, the following objectives should be achieved. You should be able to explain the strategic recruiting decisions regarding employment branding, outsourcing, and other related issues. You should be able to identify distinct labor markets and describe their unique characteristics. Explain how technology and social networking affect recruiting processes for companies and job candidates. Identify 3 internal recruiting sources and the issues associated with their use. Highlight 5 external recruiting sources and define recruiting measurement, metrics, and illustrate how analytics can be used to improve talent acquisition. So let's dive into recruiting. We just mentioned talent acquisition, and this is how we go about finding and hiring high quality talent that we need to meet our workforce needs. Recruiting is the process that we generate from a pool of applicants for specific jobs, and it connects the companies to various sources, and those sources are potential employees. And then we pick the best supplier of talent. So we're looking for who best fits a position, a job, a function. There's various considerations, including the cost of recruiting. Some people don't realize there is associated cost. Everything is attached to a dollar and a cent, and recruiting is no exception. We have to take in consideration the quality of the talent based on the position, the job, the function, the role, the goal that we're trying to achieve, and how many people that we need, right? The quantity of individuals that we need for a particular role, department, division, how many we may need for a particular project. What is the cost of not filling jobs? If we have certain functions that need to be satisfied, if we have certain positions that are still unfilled, how much does that cost us? And all of that factors into when we're thinking about these things, they all factor into each other. Figure 6.1 in your textbook shows you the components of effective recruiting. These are all the things that you take in consideration, those time limits and financial limits, because there are always limits to what you can do. There's always going to be a budget. There's going to be some kind of constraints. And then, as we mentioned, the quality and quantity of talent and what business strategies, remember those long-term strategies that you're focusing on as an entire operation, you're then having to see the human capability and capacity to meet those business strategies. And then we look at the labor market dynamics, all of the ins and outs of the labor market, what it can bear and what it cannot. And those things have to all be factored in as well. When we look at HR planning, you have to understand how and where to recruit based on the business strategies that you have, rolled out, and understanding there can be an impact based on these parameters. And then identifying the keys to success in the labor market, looking at where it is, where it can be, and where, of course, you would hope it to be, but looking at some of the various keys to success there and determining the balance between the quantity and quality of workers. In some instances, I would say that it's better to have great quality workers than have more workers. Some instances, people say we would rather have the quantity and we can fill in the gaps for the quality. You can argue both sides, and it really depends on the environment. It depends on the outcomes and the desired goals. Recognizing the limits of time and money for recruiting. As I said, there's always going to be limits. No one has a limitless budget and no one has unlimited time. So making sure that those are always recognized. And then measuring for effectiveness, knowing that you're actually effective at recruiting all of the elements that you need, right? To set the standard, but also to make sure that you're meeting or exceeding that standard, and then measuring for any time that you deviate and how to get back on track. So when we make various recruiting decisions strategically, you have to assign responsibility for recruiting, right? So that's where we are looking at the delegation process and making sure that we have the right people that are in charge for their respective roles in that, the different phases of recruiting. Employment branding, we're going to go into in greater detail in a moment, as well as employer of choice and the core versus flex staffing, and then recruiting and EEO. And we're going to look at the diversity considerations that come into play. And so when we look at responsibility, do we recruit internally through it within our company? Do we have our own HR team, or do we outsource this to a third party, to another company that specializes in recruiting, or do we use some kind of agency of sorts? RPO is the recruitment process outsourcing. It can help reduce our time and cost that are associated with recruiting. PEOs are professional employer organizations, and this is a process where we can best utilize employee leasing. And this is where you, as the employer, signs an agreement with this agency, with these organizations, and the staff is hired by the PEO and they're leased to your company for a set period of time. And you then pay the wages, the taxes, and you handle all the HR management for that. So that is what that entails. Now, the brand. This is your distinct image of the organization that helps to really capture who you are, what you stand for, your views, your values, your beliefs, how you see your consumers, how do you see your partners, how do you see your employees. And this is one way to engage with your current employees as well as outsiders. And employer of choice is basically when we look at the desirable places of employment, and it's usually tied to engagement of the employees, how satisfied workers are in the workplace with their jobs, with their pay and their benefits. It looks specifically at the level of pay in comparison to other competitors, other markets, other industries, the benefits that you're providing, comparing size and other factors. Looking at work schedules. Is there any flexibility? Is it rigid? Can you work from home? Can you come in 4 days a week? And all these different things. It looks at social responsibility and how you're leading, not just within your organization, but outside of your organization. What things are you doing to make this world a better place? So these are all the things that are built into employer of choice. This can definitely help you receive more applicants because people are attracted to the things that mean most to them and their views and their values and their beliefs. When we look at the difference between core versus flex staffing, core workers are the foundation, right? Those are your traditional workers in the workplace. Your 9 to 5s, your 8 to 5s, your, whatever the case may be. They're usually full-time, part-time. They are there. They usually work year-round. Flex workers are as needed. So this could be during the holidays. This could be during the tax season. This could be during a crisis. So these are all the different times that you could use someone as needed, especially there could be a major sale that you have going on. There are, of course, variable labor costs that are associated with this as well. Unlike your core workers, they're fixed. You know how much money that is being invested in them, because it's, with the exception of you have your deviations for turnover, but it's more of a fixed expense. Flex is definitely going to be variable. About 1/5 of Americans are flex workers. With the changing of times, and that's like kind of like a going thing. There are some ups and downs in different parts of the country, and based on different events and tragedies that take place in our country and around the world, where you can see this number rise. So, like for instance, during COVID-19, yes, we can definitely see possibility of greater flex workers during and after. Some challenges with this is that it can create a low motivation to engage, to work. There could be lower performance, and of course there's increased costs because, as I said earlier, these are variable expenses. And so with that, you're going to see it's going to cost you more than if you just had your core workers. Temp workers are those that you can hire using agencies, and they can come in hourly, weekly, daily, monthly, to do temporary assignments. That could be to fill in for any type of gap or loss. Someone could be out on maternity, paternity leave, right? Family leave. They could be out on vacation, injury, illness, whatever. The purpose of hiring them is to also help to screen for potential employees that you could hire full-time for regular employment. So it's a good way to come in. I always tell people that they should consider going through temp agencies for workplace employment. I did that for years in my late teens and my early 20s. And it allowed me to kind of try before I buy with a company, because I got to see, if I really like the company, what they stood for, because sometimes you don't know coming in the door, as an employee. So this gave me a good opportunity, and I got the chance to work for different companies that way. And whether the assignment was for a few days, a few weeks, or I stayed for a couple of months, that also gave me an opportunity to potentially be hired on. So they would then contact the agency and say, we would like to offer Natasha a position. And at that point, their contract, if I accepted the position, the contract with the agency would cease as far as it pertained to me. And then they would then take on all of the financials and responsibilities and benefits for me specifically. With this also helps match the firm's need, right? The organization's need to get the right workers, because you've been able to try to, to get into the ebb and flow of their organization enough that they can say this person is a good fit for us, and the applicant can say this company is a good fit for me. So these are some of of course, the purposes of doing so. And now here is one reason why you will see some companies hire temp workers, is to avoid the cost that they normally have to shell out with benefits, because they can still have you come in and work full time and not pay you benefits, because you're not their employee. You are the employee of the temp agency, so you're being hired out. So that's one way that they can avoid the cost associated with benefits. I would say that it could be an expensive alternative for trying to avoid paying benefits, but you can have a complementary mix, which I'll show you shortly, of how you can include core and flex staffing together. This does enhance staffing flexibility, because you can, like I said, fill in the gaps when it's needed. Now, independent contractors are your 1099 miscellaneous workers who perform specific services on a contract basis. I will say that a lot of companies have a tendency of putting people as 1099, trying to avoid having to pay benefits and pay taxes on them. But the IRS can zoom in like a wild beast if they see that there's any violation of IRS code that states that a worker who is coming in on a contractual basis and is as an independent contractor has a freedom as they are any other company. So whether they're coming in under their own company name, or they're still coming in as Jane or Joe Doe, as an independent contractor, they are to be treated as a separate entity of, meaning they have the autonomy and authority as a company that you have contracted to do work for or with, And so with that, they have the right to choose when to work, how to work, where to work. There are some guidelines that allow for some leniency in that, because let's say that the company's building is only opened during set hours. So of course the independent contractor can't push those limits. However, there should be able to be proven that the independent contractor is making decisions that are not directed 100% by the client, right? Because you're considered a client, not an employer. And so these are things that some companies get busted for, and there's some severe fines because throughout the IRS could go back through the length of that contract from when it began to when they intervened and can actually impose taxes and fines and other penalties for those violations. So, as I mentioned earlier, the advantage for the employer is that they don't have to pay out benefits. The advantage for the worker, well, they not only don't they have to pay benefits, they don't have to pay out employment taxes. The benefit to the worker, if it is truly an independent contractor relationship, is that you have greater flexibility, which means you're then, for the most part, not bound to working for that one particular client. You can have other clients as long as there's no type of clause in your contract that prevents you from working with other with that company's competitors, for instance. So you like, for instance, technically the drivers of Uber and Lyft being independent contractors, a driver should not, and their contract usually states that you're not supposed to be a driver of both companies because you're working for the competition. You do see that there are some drivers that, of course, do both because you really don't have much insider knowledge per se that could be then privy to the competition. But it is in their contract, so their contract could be null and voided based on those terms. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can mix and match any of these elements from the core, temp, and contract labor to accommodate your needs. And here is an example of how you could do something like that, where you could have the bulk of your workforce being core workers, and then you can blend any of those other elements in. What we see is that mostly for a lot of our companies, it's usually the core, temp, and indie workers. Where the PEOs come in is usually when we're having, like you said, not like you said, like I said, the executives, where you're getting some mid-level and senior executives that you need to be able to have leased in to you. It can also happen for some of your frontline executives as well, as you're building up a division or department, or coming in with some type of major contract that you don't want to necessarily hire consultants for, but you want to be able to bind in some workers who have experience with another company doing similar things. They can come in and do the work, for you. Now let's look at some advantages and disadvantages of the flex staff alternatives. Some advantages, as we already talked about, of course, is the staffing flexibility, and of course the reduction in your legal compliance. It can, of course, save money because you're not having to pay out benefits, and you can hire workers without incurring those additionally high costs. Some disadvantages are they may work less effectively, right? Their performance may be much lower than core workers because they don't have the buy-in. There is no reason to, because they know that they're there for a limited period of time. So for them, this is just transactional, and it's not a true relationship. You can see that the time limits, of course, can have a significant impact because there's no way for that person to truly enhance their skills and their knowledge within that period of time for you to have great benefit, or for them to actually have much benefit, like the takeaway for them. And if you're in a high demand field, they can actually demand, command, expect, and walk away if there's not premium wages that are on the table to hire them. So they do have the advantage there, which the company would have the disadvantage. When we look at recruiting and EEO, equal employment opportunity, of course, we talk about this in Chapter 3, I believe, but we have to look at the different considerations. Of course, the laws and the regulations, the commission's guidelines, and understanding that you must reduce as much underrepresentation of protected class members as you possibly can, and making sure that your interviews, your advertisements, any company materials that you have show diversity. Shows a desire to have, and it shows that you are actually achieving whatever goals that you set out. And diversity, as I've explained before, and I'll explain again here, is beyond just color, race, and gender, right? We have an entire buffet of what makes this world diverse. Understanding that when your brand clearly shows a diverse work environment, it can increase the amount of applicants that are submitting in their resumes. Now, when we look at figure 6.5, all of this is just showing you the visual of what I just said. It's just giving you a picture, an image, so that you can see how they all factor in, where the diversity efforts, how they're tied into the training on those issues, how they feed into compliance with the regulations of EEO, and how, of course, the compliance factors into training. And then from both compliance and training, that goes into how we target and recruit applicants, and then the efforts that we put into it through our advertising, our website, and our brochures. So here's the input and there's the output. We have to always look for non-traditional labor pools. That's what you should do. Because when you're tapping constantly on the traditional labor pools, you're not then seeing the entire buffet. You're only seeing part of it. So looking at persons with different racial, ethnic backgrounds beyond just black and white and Asian, and looking at what makes Asian, right? What makes black? What makes white? Like looking at all these other things and looking at all the different types of racial and ethnic groups that are all around the world that you will see represented here in the U.S., of course elsewhere, but just here in the U.S., it's an amazing blend of so many different backgrounds that you can choose from, and being mindful of that. Just because someone is different doesn't mean that there's something wrong with that, right? You should be very much embracing the idea of difference, because that means that someone is also thinking different. They've had different experiences, different lessons, different successes, different failures, that all of that can now be blended into an amazing experience and learning opportunities for your team. You need to look at workers that are over the age of 40 and retirees, understanding that this is a protected class, right, of people. There are federal laws that protect age discrimination. It does not mean that organizations are not discriminating against people 40 and older. It is happening right now all the time. There's lawsuits all over the place pending and fulfilled, satisfied, right? All over this country based on that. But understanding there's so much value that comes from having a worker who has had 20, 30, 40 years of experience in multiple industries with multiple backgrounds, and seeing the growth. There's also an understanding that your older workers understand about longevity and about grit. And although, yes, there can be some resistance to change in some elements, and other elements and opportunities and experiences, you'll see that there's greater push and they're great catalysts for change. A third non-traditional labor pool are single parents. We have a tendency to push away from single parents because we say, well, who's going to take care of your children while you're at work? If you are truly looking at how you can bring great value, what is really interesting to me is that we have organizations that have these office spaces, or they have these, these campuses, basically, and you have an entire, room that can, hold 20 different bodies, adult bodies, not human, adult bodies in it. And no one's ever thought about how could we create an on-site daycare, get the insurance coverage and everything that's needed for that, and whether that is a free benefit or it's something that can be a supplemental benefit where the employees who bring their children to that daycare, part of their pay is is deducted to cover, certain cost, right? So all of these different things come into play. Imagine the greater amount of productivity. You're going to have people on time because why? They didn't have to, they're not late because their babysitter didn't show up or because the daycare was closed or whatever the case may be. They're there, their kids are there. Um, you know, all of this, can definitely be done. And so that is just one example of something that an organization can do. But just recruiting the non-traditional labor pool period of single parents is valuable because it is a huge pool of male and females that are unemployed or underemployed because they're single parents. And so they're being discriminated because of that. And let me go back really quick about another reason why they're discriminated. It's not just because, well, where are you going to have your children? Is because we've created a mindset in an environment where we believe that there's no way you can commit 100% to us if you're thinking about your children. That is the stigma that has been attached to parents, especially single parents. And so we have to break down that stigma. Your organization has to see past that and say, that is just atrocious. And how can we actually have a mutually beneficial relationship? Now, a fourth category is workers with disabilities. I say the differently abled, and this is mental, physical, verbal, that people that are differently able than you or myself. And so with that is taking that in consideration. Workers that are differently able are the largest population of unemployed and underemployed workers in the United States, just because they're differently abled. A fifth category to consider are welfare to work workers. As we know that our governments are always trying to find ways to help to transition men and women off of welfare so that they are fully invested in and part of the labor force. And so oftentimes there isn't many options made available because organizations are not presenting themselves as, wanting to embrace those workers. And so if you actually position yourself to say, oh, I definitely, I'm more than open to help with that transition, to help someone be able to reach their dream, right? Because we have this American dream. We have this dream as parents. We have this dream as individuals. And so, yes, this is what, Corporation XYZ stands for. Imagine the uplift that you can have by doing so. Long-term unemployed. These are not only, and sometimes when people think, they think of people that are houseless. So I'm not going to say homeless because home is where the heart is. So some people just don't have a house, but this isn't even people that just don't have a house. It could be people that are just long-term, they've been unemployed, and whether it's on disability or if it's just other instances. This can also factor in with people that have been previously incarcerated, and because of the time they served and they are now out, we have where there's a stigma that's attached. That's the reason why a lot of the applications ask about any misdemeanors or felonies. And when people are transparent and they're honest and they share this information, because by law they have to, you then have companies that discriminate against them because now I can't trust you because of your past, even though you served your time. And the court system says that you are free and you're back in this system, and you've been punished, and now you're good, but I just can't trust you, so I'm not going to hire you, right? And with that, they could have already gone through one or two, phone interviews before that part of the application. Because if you recall, if you know, sometimes people go through, whether it's phone interviews or before they actually fill out an application. And I've done phone interviews, I've done video interviews before I have filled out an application. Before you've known my background, all you know is my work history. You know my academic history. but you don't know my personal history. So imagine how, you know, derailing and depressing that could be, that you could have actually been selected for interviews, and then because of your past, you're now being excluded for something because someone just can't get past your past. So that's just one example of what can be categorized as a long-term unemployed worker. So we have to look at gender neutral recruiting, and some people are, you know, take this to mean something beyond what it means. But gender neutral recruiting means that you're not going to allow your bias um, to come in. So, for instance, I can't request a male assistant or a female assistant there, because there's nothing that is requiring that person, is nothing that's requiring their gender to be the prevailing reason for them to be hired as the assistant to me as a professor. What does their gender have to do with being an assistant to a professor? Absolutely nothing, right? And so looking gender, when you have something that's gender balanced, you're using adjectives in recruiting ads, and it's highly encouraged because it is talking to the person, not to that specific gender. Imagine if something referred to male applicants in construction as though females cannot be in construction. Imagine if teaching positions, the adjectives that they use tended to lean more towards referencing women. Then you would then have men feel as though somehow they weren't going to be considered because they were males. So making sure there's gender balanced adjectives there, and understanding that there are generational differences in recruiting, and so you have to be able to speak to those different generations. Baby boomers, those who were born 65 and all the way to, I think it's about the 30s, late 30s. Those are your baby boomers. So it's like the late 30s to 65 are your baby boomers. They prefer traditional postings for the most part. There are some that are more hip, right? And are more open to other postings as far as, you know, online. Now, they may not necessarily be gravitating towards the Facebook and Twitters, but they could be inclined to see things on LinkedIn. But for the most part, they prefer the traditional methods. Gen X, those are born 66 to about 82, 83, prefer work-life balance programs. That's what they're going to be looking for, is how can I create some type of synergy between what I'm doing in my personal life and what I do for your company. So that I don't feel like I'm a slave to the job and I can't then enjoy my family. What's the purpose in making this salary if I can't enjoy it with my family? So I can send my family on a trip, but I can't go. So understanding there is a greater preference for this, more so that we're seeing, especially in the last 15 years. Gen Y is your millennials, and there's a preference for tech, meaningful work, right? So they just don't want to do just busy work, you know, and an opportunity to contribute to the policies and arrangements within that organization. So they want a greater buy-in and say as to how things are done and why. So that there's an amicable relationship. That's what they want to be able to have. Gen Y was able to look back at Gen X and the baby boomers and see what their grievances were, and they said, I don't want to repeat that cycle during my life cycle of a working adult. So these are definitely things that you see happening. Now, of course, when you're recruiting, you should consider reaching all generations. So this is how you can eliminate these gaps and this age discrimination, because the bias is starting before the applicant even arrives. And that's because you're not even trying to consider reaching out to baby boomers. So if you're not utilizing traditional postings, that kind of excludes baby boomers for the most part. If you're not trying to include a work-life balance program or system or practice within your organization, you are unknowingly or knowingly excluding a workforce that is basically 35 to 55, right? And if you are part of the Gen Y work employment base, right? If you are a manager or employer who happens to be from Gen Y, or you're millennial, if you then want to make sure that you're not doing to other generations what other generations were, trying to do to you, trying to do to you, basically. So making sure that you are reaching out. It doesn't mean that a baby boomer or a Gen Xer is going to actually apply for a job that you're having at your company. Maybe they're not interested in what it is that you're providing, but if you don't put it in front of them, you don't know. Now, how we go about understanding labor markets, first you need to know what a labor market is. And I mentioned it briefly, but it is literally a pool that you are casting. So you're casting out this net and you're trying to attract employees. So if you look at the ocean and you throw out this net, what fish can you catch in that net? And so that's what your labor market is. And there's different elements that make that up. Your labor force population, which we're going to talk about, your applicant population, the pool, selected applicants. And you can see how it all feeds in. So you have the greater population that entails of your labor force. So that would be the ocean, right? So you have the ocean, and then it's now feeding down into the lake, and then it comes down into maybe your pond, and then from the pond is coming into your backyard pool. That backyard swimming pool is now what you're going to select from. So you go from greatest, and you just keep weeding down until you get the selected applicants that you want to run with. The population are all available individuals. So it's every human being with a pulse that can possibly do the job, right? Those are then all the recruitment strategies that you need to focus your energy on. Is okay, here's the thousands of people in our city, our state, right? And let's say we say the region, that we're willing to recruit from the region. Maybe we are willing to recruit regionally, but we're not going to cover the cost of relocation. So if you're saying if they don't mind paying the cost, then we'll recruit regionally. If not, then let's just say that you're going to recruit within the state, and that could be, that population. Then the subset of that is what you would be available for selecting for possible recruiting. So you're going to then start to narrow that down based on whose applications can actually be most considered. And then from that, which ones can be evaluated. Because now you're saying, okay, this position right here is for engineer or for a doctor. Well, you're definitely not going to accept, applications from a person who's in a marketing or a pilot, unless they were also at one point an engineer or a doctor. So you're going to then be able to evaluate based on who's actually more aligned with the job. Now, something that's important is how we go about keeping records of our labor force, and making sure that we keep the applications, and that is required to track as well as to report our affirmative action plans. If there aren't an affirmative action plan within your company, that's a red flag, and you need to get on the good foot. Even if you're not bound legally by EEOC standards because you don't have the minimum number of employees, you should still create your own action plan, because affirmative action is not just something we think about Black people being able to break through the barriers. It is all protected classes of people who have historically been discriminated against. And I just finished sharing with you some of those protected classes, right? So what you need to be able to do is that if ever someone said that they were denied or rejected or weren't considered, and you then don't have the paperwork on them, that can further their accusation and further support their accusation that somehow you are being dismissive of them because of their protected class status, right? So making sure that that is always part of the tracking and reporting. And EEOC has guidelines for how long those records are supposed to be maintained. You can create a system that can help you recruit more effectively, so that things aren't just mosh posh all over the place. So you can have databases, or you can actually use something through a third-party provider. And then, of course, as I said about storing information to avoid various claims of impropriety on your part. When we look at unemployment rates, you have to understand that they vary with the business cycles. So depending on how your company flows from year start to end, as well as any external factors that can impact the cycle for your business, will help to gauge the unemployment rate specific to your company. And it can also depend on the skills that are needed to satisfy whatever objectives that you have. So understanding that your highly skilled workers are going to be and need to be recruited differently. Your younger tech savvy workers are highly sought after, so that means there's also going to be a greater competition for them, and that some industries will experience difficulty finding qualified workers. It's just an is. It could be based on location, it could be based on the times, what's going on in the economy, or whatever the case may be. Now, the different types of labor markets we have can be geographic, global, industry and occupational, and educational and technical. And we'll go ahead and break that down. When we look at the industry and occupational labor markets, we're looking at retail and healthcare. The educational and technical is considering how these qualifications help to define the people that are being recruited. Geographic is looking at your local area, your region, a national or even international, and how you can be able to draw in high quality applicants. Then, of course, global is where you're expanding your organization by exporting work overseas. And in doing so when it's advantageous for you, right? So when you have exhausted maybe the market within where you are, for whatever case that may be, it could be because training and education has waned in that particular field, and you're seeing that it is there's been an uptick in another country and they are thriving. Then you can, of course, export that work to them. You should not go belly up because you don't have qualified applicants in your local market. When we look at the sources that we can utilize both internally and externally, understanding that promoting from within can be very, very, very valuable and vital to your organization if and only if you have high quality applicants who can do the job, who are already exhibiting the skills and the talent to successfully jump right in and get to running or swimming or whatever the case may be. But you should not recruit from within. You should not promote from within if that person is not qualified, if they are not high quality. I tell people, don't accept a management position if you really aren't good with managing and leading yourself and others. Don't do it. If you don't like people, you shouldn't be a manager. You shouldn't even take a job dealing with people that on a grand scale. if you don't like people. Working at restaurants, fast food restaurants, things of that nature, being a cashier, it makes no sense if you don't like people. Working back behind the scenes where you have limited exposure to people, that's for people that don't like people. Not saying that people that work behind the scenes don't like people, but if you don't, it's a great environment. But you have a lot of people that are what we say people persons who are behind the scenes, right? And that's the skill set they have. I am speaking solely to people that say, I don't like people. I don't like dealing with customers. I don't like people. You don't need to be in an environment that forces you to then work with people, because the very thing that you don't like is the very thing that's going to bombard you, and what's going to come out of you is going to be a detriment to both you and the company, because you're going to ruin the company's reputation on some level. So these are things that both the candidate, the employee, and the employer need to always take in consideration, that you should always focus on getting the right person in the right position. External recruitment is when you're going to hire outside the organization, and it could be for the very reasons that I just mentioned. It could also be because you need to get some fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, some new energy into the organization, because everyone's kind of clouded by the what is around you, and you need someone to see from a different perspective. Now, some possible strategies that you can utilize to face the rapidly changing environments and conditions are that, as I said, promote from within if a qualified applicant exists, and if not, then go outside of the organization. This is how you make sure that you also remain competitively advantageous, and whether you're gaining it or you're maintaining it is to be able to go outside of that. And it can cause disharmony from applicants inside, or or people that were like, well, gosh, and they didn't even recruit from within. It's a possibility that there's a few factors at play. One can be that the factor is you. Another can be is that just the entire environment has been so tainted by whatever pervasive culture or energy or belief system that has permeated, and so they need some fresh meat, fresh ideas, fresh eyes to look at it. When we bring in technology to recruit, it's extremely vital, and we have to look at how to respectfully and wisely use social media and networking. It can be a very helpful tool for finding passive job candidates. And those are people who aren't actively looking for work, but they might be interested if the right job comes in front of them. They could say, whoa, wow, now that right there, I can see myself doing that. And had you not put that posting in front of them, they probably would not have seen it. And that could be the very person that is the right fit for your organization. I mentioned earlier LinkedIn. It is a great professional social networking site. I will say that LinkedIn sometimes is turned a little bit into Facebook, and the fact is that we do have some people that use LinkedIn because they're busy trying to do their personal networking, not professional, meaning they're trying to do hookups like this is Tinder. So just being mindful of how you screen for that, but also your own engagement in LinkedIn, that you keep those boundaries strong. Twitter can be beneficial if you can penetrate through the sea of clutter. So as long as it is the company's site that is putting out the content on their Twitter feed, then of course you're controlling the flow of what's coming from your company. It's just whether or not people are actively engaged enough to see your tweet come through because they're decided they want to follow 15,000 other people. So if your thread can come through, and it may have to come through a paid promoted post, other than that, you may have a difficult time pushing your content through on Twitter. The same is true for Facebook. So, web-based recruiting, of course, we have our internet job boards that are beneficial, our professional and career websites, and then, of course, your company's own website can have a dedicated portal to recruitment and possibly even a funnel through the application process. A rising technology is called e-video, where you as a company can put out recruitment videos, but also candidates can put out recruitment videos, and there's video interviewing. So this was taking place, of course, before COVID, and it will continue to be on a rise because it's allowing people to do video interviews, especially if the candidate's not in the same city or state as you. But also it helps to save time and money of having to schedule a lot of the in-person interviews that would probably be best suited for maybe interview number 2 or 3. So these are other tools that are definitely being utilized, and it's definitely more beneficial than just the telephone because now you can see each other. Now, I will say that yes, there can be a level of bias that comes in, and someone could see and your name didn't match your face, and now there's this, but there's no different than if you came to the face-to-face interview at their job site. The same thing can happen. So bias is going to be bias no matter what. It's whether or not a person can overcome that bias to say, I have to get past it. Wow, I thought that they would be, this person, and I end up finding out they look like this person. And so, but they're the best fit that I have found. They're the best candidate for this. And so I'm going to get past my judgment of, and I'm going to focus on what I've been able to verify through their application, their resume. So just wanted to make sure I covered that. And then there's another feature of gamification, which is using software and game thinking to help engage people into solving problems. So it could be ethical problems, it could be logistics, it could be all these different things that you can factor in to see how well a person can use their critical thinking skills, their problem solving skills, because that is then how you can gauge whether or not in real time they can apply those same skills in different environments and situations in your company. If a person is not good at critical thinking, at problem solving, at reimagining a situation, a scenario, considering different viewpoints in different ways, they may not be a good fit for your job that you have or your company at all. So that's one good way of being able to implement that. Now, the e-recruiting places that you can utilize are some of the same, right? The job boards, the websites for professional career specific, and then of course your company website. Some legal issues that have to be considered when you're recruiting using the internet, of course, is the use or misuse of screening software, because we can you put in some parameters and some algorithms that can definitely factor in our bias. Also, how we go about collecting required information and making sure that we're not collecting information that is not required for the job, not required for state, county, federal reasons, and then making sure that we're not excluding protected classes from the process, which I said has been historically an active engagement on a lot of employers' parts, and making sure that we are properly identifying real applicants and not people who are just, trolls, because we do have people that will troll. We do have people that have their own, ulterior motives that have nothing to do with actually, coming in and benefiting the organization. And then maintaining confidentiality and privacy is also very key, because we do have issues with hacking. We have issues with people selling information leaking information. So making sure all of these things are factored in when you are doing your internet recruiting. So certain things should not be exchanged using the internet that are confidential and private. Some things would have to be done in person, for instance, or through snail mail. Now let's look at some advantages and disadvantages. I've already talked about the disadvantage of privacy. You can definitely have more unqualified applicants because people are just going to apply just to apply. You can then, of course, increase the work for HR staff because you can exhaust them. So that's sometimes the reasons why companies will use third-party HR professionals to help with that or to just take over that solely. And you may have people that are not really serious about seeking employment. They just want to apply for the job, come for an interview or whatever. They just want attention. And some of the advantages, of course, can be that it can be very cost effective. It can take less time, right, to recruit. And you can actually have a broader exposure and more diverse pool of applicants. And you can now be better at targeting specific audiences and reaching those passive job seekers that normally you wouldn't be able to reach. So some of our internal sources that we can utilize is our own databases that we create, where you can keep track of your employees' knowledge, their skills, and their abilities, and you enter all that in a database. So you have your employees, every year, for instance, provide an updated summary of any courses they've taken, any degrees they've earned, any certificates they've earned, what skills they have achieved not only in the workplace but outside of the workplace, any type of abilities that they have from before and since they've been working for the company. You can keep updating that database because when you're then looking for candidates and you're talking about, let's consider internal promotion or recruitment, you can then be able to use the parameters that you have set in your database to say, let's pull up all the employees that have experience in marketing, or all the employees that have experience in coding, because you may have a tech team and you're thinking, oh, these are the only people that work for us that have a background in tech. But you may have other applicants who are just working in other departments or divisions that actually have, similar backgrounds. They just didn't apply for that position, or maybe that position wasn't available when they, first came through the company. And now all of a sudden you find out you have a person that has a strong background in Python or Java or whatever, and here they are and they're working over here in your legal department or your marketing department or in your warehouse or whatever. And now you can say, hey, we have this possible position that you may like, would you like to interview for it? So these are one ways that you can use the database for that. It can help if you can sort through your employees' data using different occupational fields and work histories, education, other variables. And then that can all be linked to your HR activities, so that HR is constantly engaging with the workforce beyond just being the keepers of the entry and exit of workers, right? And being the paperwork pushers for write-ups and punishment and rewards. Let HR also be actively engaged in that type of relationship building through KSAs. We can have internal job posting systems where you can provide notices of openings, and then your current employees can respond by applying for specific openings, and that can be your company intranet, promotions and transfers. And having employee-focused recruiting allows you to have reliable sources from current as well as former employees, because they're familiar with the company, right? They're not going to refer someone who's unqualified, because that is their reputation. They don't want someone saying, wow, Sam, you referred Bill, and Bill is the least qualified. Like, what were you thinking? You just wanted to hang out with Bill? You could have hung out with Bill before work, after work. Why did you bring Bill into this environment? So they're going to make sure that they're going to refer qualified individuals, especially if that's tied to some kind of incentive, like a bonus or something that is, quarterly or annually or however you want to look at it, or one time. You can get current employee referrals. You can have re-recruiting of former employees and applicants, right? So that could be someone that used to work for the company and you're going back out to bring them back into the fold. That could be people that have applied, but they didn't meet the cut. And now you have this opportunity and you're like, hey, are you, I know you didn't meet the cut the last time, but now, we have this position that's available. Are you still looking? Are you still wanting to come and have a relationship with us? And then seeking out former employees and recruiting them again. Now, the pros and cons of internal recruiting, you can see this diagram in figure 6.9, is that of course it can improve the morale of the person that's being promoted. You can provide more accurate performance history and it can lower your recruiting cost. This can also, though, unfortunately cause a system of inbreeding that can create a less diverse workforce because you just keep recycling the same people in your thing. There's no growth, right? there's no growth of your knowledge base in the KSAs because it's the same. This can lead to tunnel vision, that can lead to lack of new ideas, and it can actually lower morale if someone's not promoted. There can be political infighting for promotions, and those that are promoted may need to be trained or developed, which means that can be additional cost for your company. And then, as I've shared before, is that some managers who operate out of fear and lack may actually block the internal movement of good performers. They may want to try to hold them down. And so these are the different things. So you have to make sure that if you're going to recruit internally, that you address these issues to the right, so that you can have more pros than cons. The external recruiting sources, of course, through the media, having competitive recruiting sources going, employment agencies, labor unions, job fairs, and creative recruiting, educational institutions. We're going to look at some advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are that new employees, as I've said before, and I'll keep saying, they bring new perspectives, right? That can be applied to various challenges and opportunities. They can be cheaper and faster to train because they have the prior external experience. There's less likely to have any type of internal political issues or challenges because they aren't part of the firm. And they may bring new industry insights and expertise, and also you can bring in a larger applicant pool. Now, some disadvantages are that they may not fit well with the job in the organization, and that's the case, right, for the employees that you currently had that you recruited externally. Maybe they fit, maybe they did. So this can be a disadvantage. Something else is that it can also cause morale problems for employees that were already with the company that applied for the job and they weren't selected. So it can create a mindset of, well, why them and not me? What makes them so special? And that can create some discord and disharmony. The new employee may require longer adjustment periods and orientation efforts, so they may not be able to just jump right in the first 60, 90 days. It may take them longer. So you have to be willing to work with that and understanding that the recruiting process may take more time and resources because you are going outside of your internal pool. And you have to be more intentional in the evaluation of those applications. And so that means you're going to put more applications in front of your recruiters. That can be taxing on your HR department or any other person that this task has been delegated to. So when we look at the media sources, of course, there's TV, radio, magazines, newspapers, billboards, internet of, you have their postings, ads, videos, webinars. You have some effectiveness for evaluating those media ads by tracking responses using phone codes, email addresses, contact names in each of your ads. You can follow up to know which sources produce employees who stay longer and perform better. So there are ways to be able to track and evaluate the placement of that. The competitive recruiting sources that I mentioned, of course, are the trade associations, your professional associations, various publications, and even your competitors. We see it. You are not supposed to poach from your competitors, but it happens. You can also recruit your customers. Sometimes some of your best employees are actually your customers. Applications can be available in store, online, and in kiosk, where they can just apply right there on site. You can schedule in-store interviews, and of course doing interviews in the other ways that I mentioned earlier. And then you can have employment announcements in newsletters, but also you can submit them with the bills and invoices that you send to your customers or clients. There are some public and private employment agencies. Some are state sponsored, which they operate out of branch offices in various cities. They don't charge fees to the applicants or the employers. So a lot of people don't realize that. There are private agencies that operate in most cities. There is a fee that's collected from both the employee or the employer. It can be one or the other. It could be both. There are headhunters. Those are employment agencies that focus their efforts on executive, managerial, and professional positions. All right, so let's be specific with that. There are some contingency firms that will charge after the candidate is hired. So there's no fee before, but once they're hired, they'll charge a fee for that. We have a lot of times where the temp agencies or some of the employment agencies will, like the private ones, they'll charge the fee up front. So there are some contingency ones that say only after they're hired will we charge. That contingency fee, though, I can say can be high. It depends on the position and how much that salary was going for, because oftentimes that could be expressed in the job posting. So if you say the position is $105,000 a salary, the firm knows what their percentage is, and sometimes it's like a 10% fee or 5% fee or whatever. So there's different things that can go into place. So just understand that they're not cheap. That's why they can grow as big as they do and have their agencies all over the country and the world. Now, there's also retainer firms that charge a set fee, and this can be whether the applicant is hired or not. Labor unions are also a really good source to gather your labor pool, if through unions, because of course we know we have layoffs and we have turnover and things of that sort, and so labor unions are definitely a pool. They can be dispatched from the hiring hall to particular jobs to meet your needs. There's job fairs, right? So you can be able to go to the job fair and you can meet candidates on the site. Sometimes it's beneficial. Sometimes you're having people that you don't really know if they're really serious or not. And just like on the flip side, as a candidate, just because you went to a job fair and you sat in front of a person, you really don't know if that person has the autonomy and authority to actually make a hiring decision, or whether or not they are just there to, collect applications and resumes. So just because you go to the fair does not mean that you're actually going to get a call for an interview. It's really about, it's almost like a speed dating, right? So you're just introducing yourselves to each other. Doesn't mean that you're going to get a second date. There are virtual job fairs that we're seeing more prevalent now, understanding that trying to hustle and bustle hundreds of people inside of a structure It can be costly and time consuming. And so there's ways to be more specific and intentional by having virtual ones, because now a person's like, oh my gosh, where's IBM? Where's AT&T? Where's the folks from Walmart? Where's the folks from, Atlanta Technical College or whatever, right? Now having the virtual ones will allow you to be more intentional, both in the recruiting aspect, but also for the candidate to find you. And they're usually used to recruit college students, right? And they're more convenient, as I said, time efficient, and for the university staff is less work, because then that person isn't having to drive and go through the time that it takes to get to those fairs and set up their tables and all of their marketing information, and then repitch this information over and over and over again. So the virtual ones can definitely be more convenient for the staff. When you look at your educational institutions and recruiting, a significant source of employees can actually come from colleges and universities. People don't actually think about how they can recruit from colleges and universities. There are some attributes that you look at for college recruits is those students who have a desirable GPA, and if they have any real world experience, that's a bonus. Internships can be very valuable as long as you don't abuse that relationship. We do see some employers who hire interns for free, right? So you try to get free labor and you're just trying to work them. And actually, an internship is the ability for them to come to learn so they can get, yes, real world experience. At the same time, you're teaching them. So that's what an internship is supposed to be about, is the teaching and the application. Unlike just being in the classroom where you can get the teaching and the theory, you may not necessarily get the application in the classroom. So an internship allows for you to then apply, and understanding that in the real world experience, right, on the job, they may use different terminology and have different practices that are different than the formally executed or expressed way that you've learned from your instructor in the classroom. So it may be the exact same thing, just taught differently. And so you need to have that broad experience. And so an internship, whether it's paid or unpaid, can be very beneficial. Just understand going into an unpaid internship that when you start to see that you're actually just there to go and collect coffee and donuts, that's not an internship. You're just being, a flunky. So if you really want to have experience, walk away from that internship and go to where you will actually be able to learn and apply what you're learning. School recruiting from high school and vocational technical schools, there's also recruitment there, especially students with particular skills. A lot of companies don't realize how valuable that can be, because you're looking at, getting, especially if you have, if the minimum requirement to work at your company is age 15 or 16 or whatever, right? And you can then turn around and say, well, goodness, we can, host some type of virtual job fair, or we can send promotional flyers to the principal of the school, to the school district, to get approval to go to all of their schools, so that we can recruit students with these particular skill sets to come and work for our company. So there is recruitment opportunities there. And so when we look at the considerations for employers, here's all the different things that you're looking at: is the budget, and the pay levels of college graduates, the current and anticipated openings that you have for jobs, the experiences of prior college graduates and interns, the reputation of your company at that college and with previous college graduates, and then any graduate programs and faculty links that you can consider, and then that placement of the college, with the reputation of the office and any assistance and programs. So all of these things are factored into your considerations. There is some great fruit that can come from college recruiting. When we look at recruiting evaluation and metrics, of course, we're evaluating for quality and quantity, satisfaction, the time required to fill those openings, and then, of course, the cost of recruiting. So we're going back to the very first slides that we talked about earlier. Is now we're evaluating for all these things to see whether or not we're meeting or exceeding the standards, or if there's any deviation, how we can jump in and make those fixes. Figure 613 is looking at the measurement areas for recruiting. So those metrics are, once again, the quantity and quality and everything. But going down further, you see that there is a cost per recruiting method. There's some ratios as far as for yield, and of course the rates of selection, acceptance, and success base. And the textbook goes into greater analysis of all of those metric areas. I'm going to go over some of those. Our yield ratios are the comparison of the number of applicants that we have at one stage in recruiting with the number that we have at the next stage. So of course that yield can show that the number is the reduction and by how much. And you can factor in what triggered the reduction. The selection rate is looking at the percentage of people that were actually hired from a given group of candidates. So the candidates that came in January versus the candidates that came in July, or the candidates that came in from a specific college. Those are different things, so we can see where we're getting the best pool of candidates. The acceptance rate, we're looking at the percentage of applicants that are hired, and we're dividing that by the total number of jobs that were actually offered. So we had that to play into, is how many of those were actually accepted. And then what's our success base, the longer term measurement of how well we're recruiting and how effective we are, is the success rate of how long those applicants are actually with us. How long do they stay in this relationship? How long do we commit in this this business love thing, right? That is the rate that we can be able to say that we are doing a great job, and here's the ways in which we are. When we look at figure 614, you can see this as a pyramid. As I've said plenty times before in business, we love, pyramids, whether they're going up or down. And so you can see this as a visual of your hire slash offer recipients. So that's your yield ratio of 50%. So it's the 5 out of 10. So there was 5 hires out of 10 people that were offered, right? And then there's your offer recipients of a yield of 66%, which was the 10 out of 15 of the final interviewees. You'll see that there is a final interviewees, which are your initial contacts. There was a yield rate of 15%, or 15 out of 100. So you see that you had the final interviewees, you had some formal applicants of 30, but of those initial contacts of 100, you only had 15 that made it to that final interview. When you tie in the total initial contacts of 100 and how many were actually hired, you see that you have a 5% rate. Only 5 out of 100 were actually hired. So you can then look in between all those layers to see what broke, where were the different things how did that you get to that point? And those are the ways in which it gives you a better look at your success rate later, right? As those 5 hires, how long do those 5 hires last past that 60-day, 90-day, 6-month, 1 year, 2 year, right? How long are they staying on? So when we look at how we can increase our effectiveness, there's various activities, such as making sure that in our resume mining. Now, I will say that I do have some issues with certain elements of resume mining because it creates a type of environment that we have that people are now constantly trying to extract from our job postings, select keywords that are then aligning with the algorithms of whatever system that you utilize that can help you mine resumes. That is one layer of a computer helping to says, hey, this person's resume uses the same words that we use in the job posting, but what skill set are you utilizing as an HR professional, as a manager, to then truly go through the resumes? Because What about the resumes that didn't use the, these different terms that were gathered by the algorithm? Those are now just being excluded. You don't even oftentimes see those. And that can be a detriment to an organization because of that. So that is something that I will say as a flag, as a caveat to resume mining. And then of course we use applicant training, your own career website that you have on your company site, any type of internal mobility system, and some realistic job previews, and then timely responses. And these are things that we go into greater depth in detail in chapter 6. So when we look at the effectiveness, how we increase that is using the evaluation data to target different applicant pools. So not trying to go into that same pool of water, but we're hopping from different pools to make sure that we get a good sampling from others, and making sure that we're tapping into broader labor markets. So we're going beyond just the city of Atlanta to expanding outwardly throughout the state, possibly even the region. And how we go about changing our recruiting methods, keeping things fresh and innovative, and improving our internal handling of applicants, and how we go about interviewing them. Making sure that people that are doing the interviewing are highly skilled at that, right? Because sometimes you can lose a really great candidate because your interviewer is not really strong in that area. And making sure that we're properly training recruiters and managers on all the cycles of the recruitment process, right, and all the stages, and placing a greater emphasis on the positive aspects of the job itself and the employer. But making sure there's a level of transparency where the person understands what the expectations are from the employer, and as well as from the candidate. Right. And so don't try to sugarcoat and try to cover up the fact, if this is a very labor intensive job, it needs to also be very clear. But what's the positive of any type of benefits or perks or work environment that counters the intensity of the labor? So with that, that is the end of this chapter. That was a lot. I hope that you made it through all the various quizzes that were part of this interactive video. If you have any questions, please email me. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.